It's December 1968, and Elvis Presley was sitting under the bright studio lights of a television set. The man who could make thousands of screaming fans go silent with just one look is about to experience something he's never felt before: complete and utter vulnerability on live television. 3 weeks earlier, Elvis had pulled off the impossible. His '68 comeback special had reminded the world why they called him the king of rock and roll. After years of making forgettable movies in Hollywood, Elvis was back. The black leather suit, the raw energy, the undeniable talent, it was all there, burning brighter than ever. Fans were calling it his return to greatness. Critics were eating their words. Elvis Presley was on top of the world again. But success in music couldn't fix what was broken at home. Behind the leather jacket and the confident smile, Elvis was fighting a battle that no amount of screaming fans could help him win. His marriage to Priscilla, the woman America saw as his perfect princess, was quietly falling apart. And on this particular December night, when a talk show host dared to bring up her name, the world would see their idol in a way they never had before. This is the story of the night Elvis Presley's armor cracked. The night when America's golden boy became human in front of millions of viewers. The night that changed everything we thought we knew about the king of rock and roll. It's a story that's been buried for decades, whispered about in Hollywood circles, but never fully told. Until now. To understand what happened that December night, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to the fairy tale that wasn't quite as magical as it seemed. Elvis and Priscilla Presley were supposed to be America's royal couple. When they got married in 1967, the world watched with hearts full of romance and dreams. Here was the most famous man in the world marrying his beautiful girlfriend after years of waiting. The photos were perfect. The smiles were dazzling. The story was exactly what America wanted to hear. But behind those perfect wedding photos, cracks were already showing. Priscilla had been living at Graceland since she was 17 years old. That sounds romantic when you're reading about it in a magazine, but the reality was much more complicated. Elvis was a man who needed to control everything around him. Where Priscilla went, what she wore, who she talked to, Elvis had opinions about all of it. He meant well, but love and control don't mix the way people think they do. While Elvis was traveling the world, performing for screaming crowds and living the life of a superstar, Priscilla was often alone at Graceland. The big house that looked so glamorous from the outside felt like a beautiful prison from the inside. She was married to the most famous man in the world, but she spent most of her time by herself, waiting for him to come home. And when he did come home, he was exhausted, stressed, and often lost in his own world of prescription pills and endless pressure. Priscilla was changing too, though Elvis didn't want to see it. The teenage girl he had fallen in love with was becoming a woman with her own thoughts and dreams. She started taking karate lessons, not because Elvis wanted her to, but because she wanted to. She began reading books about philosophy and spirituality. She was finding her own voice, her own identity beyond being Elvis Presley's wife. But Elvis was terrified of losing her, so instead of giving her the freedom she needed, he held on tighter. The tension in their marriage was like a slow-burning fuse. From the outside, everything looked perfect. They appeared together at premieres, smiled for photographers, and played the part of Hollywood's golden couple, but people close to them could see the strain. Priscilla's smile seemed forced. Elvis was more controlling than ever. The easy laughter and natural chemistry they once had was being replaced by careful performances for the cameras. Then came the '68 comeback special, and suddenly Elvis had hope again. Maybe if his career was back on track, everything else would fall into place. Maybe if he was the king again, he could figure out how to be a good husband too. The special was a massive success, bigger than anyone had dared to dream. Elvis was relevant again, exciting again, necessary again. For a few weeks, it felt like everything was going to be okay. But career success couldn't fix a marriage that was built on the wrong foundation. The comeback put even more pressure on Elvis to be perfect, to maintain his image, to never let anyone see him as anything less than the confident king of rock and roll. And that pressure was about to reach its breaking point on a late-night television show that most people have forgotten about. On a night when one simple question about his wife would reveal the man behind the myth in the most heartbreaking way possible. Most people have never heard of After Midnight with Johnny Vale. It was one of those late-night talk shows that came and went without making much noise in television history. Vale wasn't Johnny Carson. He didn't have the smooth charm or the A-list guests. What he did have was a reputation for asking the questions that other hosts were too polite or too scared to ask. He made his living pushing celebrities into uncomfortable territory, and somehow he convinced Colonel Parker that Elvis should be his guest. Elvis didn't want to do the show. This wasn't unusual. By 1968, he was tired of the endless interviews and appearances that came with being Elvis Presley. But Colonel Parker had made the deal, and Colonel Parker's deals were not negotiable. Besides, Parker argued it was just a small late-night show. How much damage could it do? What Parker didn't know was that Elvis was already hanging by a thread, emotionally exhausted from weeks of recording sessions and the constant pressure to maintain his perfect public image. The day of the tapping, Elvis woke up at Graceland feeling like he was carrying the weight of the world. He'd had another argument with Priscilla the night before, one of those quiet, painful conversations that married couples have when they both know something is wrong but neither wants to say it out loud. She had been distant lately, spending more time away from the house, finding excuses to be anywhere but home. Elvis knew she was unhappy, but he didn't know how to fix it without admitting that maybe he was part of the problem. That morning, Elvis called Priscilla before he left for the studio. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but everyone who was there could hear the tension in his voice. "I'll be back tonight," he said, but even those simple words sounded strained. Priscilla's response was polite but cold. There was no "I love you" at the end of the call, no "good luck with the show," just a quiet goodbye that hung in the air like a storm cloud. The makeup artist who worked on Elvis that day later said she had never seen him so distracted. Usually, Elvis was charming and talkative during these pre-show preparations. He would joke with the crew, tell stories, make everyone feel like they were part of something special. But that December evening, he sat in the makeup chair staring at himself in the mirror with an expression she described as haunted. When she asked if he was okay, he just nodded and said, "Just thinking about things." 20 minutes before the show was supposed to start, Elvis stood up and walked toward the exit. His security team scrambled to follow him, thinking he was just stepping outside for air. But Elvis kept walking, past the stage doors, past the parking lot, toward his car. For a moment, it looked like the king of rock and roll was about to walk away from a live television tapping. It was only when one of his bodyguards gently reminded him about all the people who were counting on him that Elvis stopped, took a deep breath, and walked back inside. The show began normally enough. Johnny Vale introduced Elvis with the usual fanfare, and Elvis walked out wearing his signature smile. To the studio audience and the viewers at home, he looked like the same confident superstar they had always known. He answered Vale's first few questions with his usual charm, talking about his music, his recent comeback, his plans for the future. But people who knew Elvis well could see something different in his eyes. There was a wariness there, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. Vale was smart enough to start with safe questions, building up the audience's comfort level before he moved in for the kill. He asked about Elvis's childhood, his early music, his time in the army. Elvis relaxed slightly, falling into the familiar rhythm of telling stories he had told 1,000 times before. The audience laughed at his jokes, applauded at the right moments, and for a few minutes everything seemed normal. But Johnny Vale was just warming up. He had been building toward this moment from the second Elvis walked onto his stage, and now it was time to ask the question that would change everything. The question came out of nowhere, delivered with the casual tone of someone asking about the weather. "Elvis," Johnny Vale said, leaning forward in his chair with that practiced television host smile, "there are rumors circulating about Priscilla. People are saying she's been seen around town with her karate instructor. Care to comment on that?" The studio audience, which had been chattering and laughing just seconds before, went completely silent. It was as if someone had suddenly sucked all the air out of the room. Elvis froze, not the kind of pause you see when someone is thinking about how to answer a difficult question, but a complete total freeze. His face went blank, his body went rigid, and for 47 seconds that felt like 47 years to everyone watching, Elvis Presley said absolutely nothing. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his shock and pain. His eyes, which had been sparkling with their usual mischief just moments before, went flat and distant. The confident smile disappeared completely, replaced by an expression of raw vulnerability that no one had ever seen from him before. The silence stretched on and on. Johnny Vale, who had built his career on making celebrities uncomfortable, suddenly realized he had gone too far. He shifted nervously in his chair, glanced at his producer in the wings, and tried to figure out how to fix what he had just broken. The studio audience sat frozen, unsure whether they should applaud, boo, or just disappear. Some people later said they felt like they were witnessing something sacred and terrible, like watching a great building collapse in slow motion. When Elvis finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The confident baritone that had made him famous was gone, replaced by something fragile and breaking. He started, then stopped. He reached for the glass of water on the table next to him, but his hands were shaking so badly he almost knocked it over. "She's finding herself," he said finally, and those 3 words carried more weight than any song he had ever sung. In that moment, Elvis Presley wasn't the king of rock and roll. He wasn't a superstar or an icon. He was just a man whose marriage was falling apart and he couldn't hide it anymore. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Elvis looked down at his hands, then back up at Johnny Vale, then out at the audience that was staring at him with a mixture of sympathy and fascination. "That's all I can say about that," he added quietly, but the damage was already done. The mask had slipped and everyone could see the man underneath. It was heartbreaking and beautiful and terrible all at the same time. Johnny Vale tried to recover, tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but it was too late. The interview stumbled along for a few more minutes, with Elvis giving short, distracted answers to questions about his upcoming tour dates and recording plans. But everyone in that studio knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, the moment when Elvis Presley's carefully constructed public image cracked wide open, revealing the lonely, confused, heartbroken man inside. The show ended abruptly, earlier than scheduled. Elvis stood up, shook Johnny Vale's hand with professional courtesy, and walked off the stage without his usual wave to the audience. Behind the scenes, there was chaos. The show's producer wasn't sure whether to air the footage or bury it. Elvis's team was scrambling to do damage control. And somewhere in Memphis, Priscilla was probably getting ready for bed, having no idea that her husband had just laid his heart bare on national television, or that his three simple words, "she's finding herself," would prove to be more prophetic than anyone could have imagined. The moment Elvis walked off that stage, panic set in behind the scenes. The show's producer, a man named Bill Henderson, had seen plenty of celebrity meltdowns in his 20-year career, but nothing like this. He stood in the control room, watching the playback of those 47 seconds of silence over and over again, trying to decide if he had just captured television gold or career suicide. His assistant kept asking if they should call Elvis's people, if they should edit out the awkward moment, if they should pretend it never happened. But Henderson knew they had something bigger than entertainment. They had captured a piece of history. The network executives were not happy. When word reached them about what had happened during the tapping, the phone calls started immediately. Elvis Presley was not just any celebrity, he was a cultural institution, and institutions were not supposed to fall apart on live television. There were heated discussions about whether to air the episode at all. Some wanted to shelve it completely, claiming it would be cruel to broadcast Elvis's moment of vulnerability. Others argued that it showed his humanity in a way that would actually make people love him more. The debate went on for hours. Johnny Vale himself was shaken by what had happened. After the tapping, he sat alone in his dressing room, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He had built his career on pushing celebrities to their breaking point, but this felt different. This felt like he had accidentally kicked down the door to someone's private pain. Years later, Vale would say that Elvis's reaction haunted him for the rest of his life. He had wanted to create good television, but instead he had created something that felt almost too intimate to share with the world. When the show finally aired 3 days later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The network's phone lines were jammed with calls from viewers who had watched Elvis's breakdown with a mixture of heartbreak and love. Contrary to what the executives had feared, people didn't turn away from Elvis in his moment of vulnerability, they embraced him even more. Fan letters poured in by the thousands, with people sharing their own stories of marriage troubles and personal struggles. Many wrote that seeing Elvis as a real person, rather than an untouchable superstar, made them feel less alone in their own problems. The media coverage was unlike anything Elvis had experienced before. Instead of the usual gossip and speculation, newspapers and magazines wrote about his courage in showing his true emotions. Journalists who had spent years trying to crack Elvis's perfect public image suddenly found themselves writing about his humanity with genuine respect. One critic wrote, "In 47 seconds of silence, Elvis Presley taught us more about love and loss than most people learn in a lifetime." Another called it the most honest moment in television history. But the real aftermath was happening away from the cameras, in the quiet corners of Elvis's life. His friends and family noticed changes in him immediately after the interview. He seemed both relieved and terrified by what he had revealed. For years, he had carried the weight of being everyone's idea of perfection, and now that mask was gone. Some days he felt freed by the honesty, other days he felt exposed and vulnerable. His relationship with Priscilla became even more strained, as if his public admission of their problems had made them impossible to ignore. The interview had forced them both to confront the truth they had been avoiding. Their marriage was not the fairy tale everyone thought it was, and maybe it never had been. Within months, the rumors about Priscilla and her karate instructor would prove to be true, and the couple would begin the slow, painful process of growing apart that would end in their separation just a few years later. 57 years have passed since that December night, and Elvis's 3 words, "she's finding herself," still echo through popular culture like a prophecy that came true. Those words, spoken in a moment of raw honesty, turned out to be more accurate than anyone could have predicted. Priscilla was indeed finding herself, discovering who she was beyond being Elvis Presley's wife, and that journey would eventually lead her away from their marriage and toward her own independent life. In 1973, when Elvis and Priscilla announced their separation, many people remembered that late-night television moment and realized they had witnessed the beginning of the end years before it actually happened. The interview changed more than just Elvis's public image. It changed how America thought about celebrity and vulnerability. Before that night, stars were expected to be perfect, untouchable, always in control. They were supposed to have fairy tale marriages and problem-free lives, existing as escape fantasies for regular people dealing with regular problems. But Elvis's moment of raw honesty opened a door that could never be closed again. Suddenly, it was okay for celebrities to be human, to struggle, to admit that fame and fortune couldn't solve every problem. The interview became a template for authentic celebrity culture, influencing how stars interact with the public even today. For Elvis personally, the aftermath of that interview was complicated. On one hand, fans loved him more deeply than ever before. The vulnerability he showed made him more relatable and somehow more precious to the people who adored him. His concerts in the years following the interview were filled with audiences who seemed to understand him on a deeper level, who cheered not just for the king of rock and roll, but for the man who had been brave enough to show his broken heart on television. But the emotional openness also took its toll. Elvis had spent his entire adult life maintaining a carefully constructed image, and suddenly living without that protection felt overwhelming. Some who knew him said the interview marked the beginning of his retreat into the isolation and prescription drug use that would eventually destroy him. The show's host, Johnny Vale, never quite recovered from the guilt of what happened that night. His career continued, but he never again asked the kind of provocative personal questions that had made him famous. In interviews years later, he would say that seeing Elvis's pain up close had changed his understanding of what entertainment should be. He realized that there was a difference between creating compelling television and causing genuine human suffering, and he spent the rest of his career trying to find that balance. But perhaps the most important legacy of that December night was the lesson it taught about love and marriage. Elvis's admission that Priscilla was finding herself was not an excuse or a dismissal. It was an acknowledgement that love sometimes means letting someone grow, even if that growth takes them away from you. His words recognized something that many people struggle to understand, that trying to control someone you love is not actually love at all. Priscilla did find herself, eventually becoming a successful businesswoman, actress, and individual in her own right. And while their marriage didn't survive, their love evolved into something different but equally real, a deep friendship and mutual respect that lasted until Elvis's death and continues in Priscilla's protective care of his legacy today. In the end, those 47 seconds of silence and 3 simple words gave us something more valuable than any song Elvis ever recorded. They gave us proof that even the king of rock and roll was, at his core, just a man trying to love and be loved, struggling with the same hopes and fears that touch every human heart. Elvis Presley gave the world his voice, his moves, his charisma. But on that December night in 1968, he gave us something far more precious, his truth. In 47 seconds of silence and 3 whispered words, the king showed us that even legends are human. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made him truly immortal. The courage it took for Elvis to be that vulnerable, that honest, in front of millions of people is something we can all learn from. In a world that still pressures us to be perfect, to hide our struggles, to pretend everything is always okay, Elvis's moment of raw honesty reminds us that our humanity, not our perfection, is what connects us to each other. If this untold story of Elvis's most vulnerable moment moved you, there's so much more hidden history waiting to be discovered. Stories that the music industry tried to bury, moments that reveal the real people behind the legends, secrets that change everything we thought we knew about our favorite stars. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible untold stories from music history. And speaking of buried secrets, next week we're diving into something even more shocking. The lost Elvis recording session where he completely broke down in the studio, sobbing so hard he couldn't finish the song. His estate tried to hide this recording for decades, but we found the people who were there that day and their stories will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss the Elvis recording that his family tried to destroy forever. What did you think about Elvis's moment of vulnerability? Have you ever had to watch someone you love find themselves, even when it meant growing apart from you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories often inspire our next deep dives into music history. Thanks for taking this emotional journey with me today. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful thing a legend can do is show us they're human too.